Stuff. Awesome. Right, we'll get started then.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Paul, and thank you. You're doing an amazing job with Teams Nation today. We wouldn't be able to do this great work without your help, so thank you so much. We really appreciate you volunteering and putting all your energy behind Teams Nation. My name is Anna Chu. I'm joined by Brian Hart. We're both from Microsoft, and we're here to talk to you about building engaging user groups with Microsoft Teams. I lead a lot of things, but specifically I am a program manager for Power Automate as well as Power Virtual Agents. But I also have another job, which is to lead user group strategy for the Dynamics 365 and Power Platform community team. So that's a lot of different hats I wear, but specifically I want to talk to you today about user groups, because we would not be able to do what we do for our Dynamics 365 and Power Platform user groups without the partnership of folks like Brian on the Microsoft Teams engineering team. And a lot of the things I'm sharing with you today are specifically things that we have learned about building community powered by Microsoft Teams. I hope that something that you can learn over the next 40 minutes can be something you take away when building your user groups, but certainly I'll be sharing with you the lessons that we have learned, and hoping that if you are focused on Power Platform or Dynamics 365, you might be interested in our program. This session is being recorded, and we definitely want to interact with you. To my understanding, people can ask us questions in Teams, and I can see there have been some chat previously as well, so that's great. From Holly and Isadora's session. So yeah, please start engaging with us in chat. Brian and I will be paying attention to the chat window as we go along with today's presentation. But also let us know how we're doing using Teams reactions. I hope I can see the reactions as they come through. Otherwise, I'll just have to pretend that you're applauding me. But really excited to be talking to you today. And of course, you know, would love for you to fill out the evaluation at the very end to let us know how we did. So without further ado, I really want to talk to you about, you know, why user groups are important to us. And it's really, you know, quotes like these. We've been talking to our user groups for the last 6 months. I joined this team back in September. And when I was asked to lead this charter, this really spoke to me, because community is what really motivates me to get up in the morning and get to work. And for Matt Allington, who is a user groups leader in Sydney, it's the same for him. For him, it's why he gets motivated to do the work that he does. When you do user groups, you are taking time out of your 9-to-5 job, you are taking time out of your personal schedule in order to give back to the community. It's very selfless, but also that's why it's so compelling, because these are people who really have a lot of belief and trust behind the product, and also are doing this for the community. They don't get to earn anything out of it. It's because they want to generate community, and that's how they, you know, get their joy from you know, leading user groups and leading community groups. So for us, why Microsoft cares about user groups, it's because ultimately it's about the people. These are people who care about our products, and they're also going to give us unfiltered feedback. It's most likely that they're talking amongst themselves about the products, what you can do, and that's how others get inspired by, you know, different solutions that people have found with our products. And that's the best kind of marketing that we could have. You know, like, our sales people are great, our marketers are great, but there's nothing more compelling and authentic than someone who doesn't have any skin in the game, who wants to share with other folks, with their friends, with people that they know what they love about products that we are in charge of driving within the community. And ultimately, we love user groups because it allows us to connect with you. If it wasn't for user group leaders who are gathering people together who are just interested to learn about our products, we wouldn't be able to connect with you all as a group to have that conversation about what we can do to make our products better. And the thing is, user groups have undergone a vast amount of change, as we're all aware. Over the last 2.5 years, the pandemic has affected us in many, many, many different ways. We have felt more disconnected as we have suddenly shifted towards staying at home, being virtual in engaging with community. It's forced us to stare at screens every day, which is good and bad. It has enabled us to get connected to a vast and global community, but I don't know about you, but I certainly feel the pain of digital fatigue, not only just because I'm only interacting through a tiny hole in a camera, but certainly just the amount of meetings that I have that are back to back, and I barely have time to catch up between meetings. And ultimately, because there are less events being hosted in person, we feel like the glue that has brought us together as a community has been lost, or at least temporarily, until things get back to normal, as people like to say. But this is a thing, you know, we have learned a lot in the last 2+ years, as Brian mentioned. This slide may be, you know, could be interpreted as what extroverts have learned in the last 2 years. But essentially, we have really come to value time. I am double booked, triple booked every day at any time point during the week. And so we have to really choose what we invest time in. Are we going to prioritize our work? Are we going to prioritize our family? Are we going to prioritize our hobbies? Are we going to prioritize community? Right? So we have really started to stack rank all the different things that motivate us and determine what really rises to the top as to things that we commit to. And if people like Chris and Vessa and everyone who's behind Teams Nation, we really are in debt to them to be really driving community. So hats off to them for everything that they've been doing, especially during this global pandemic and all of the other turmoil that we've been going through over the last few years as well. But we also miss people. I miss you all so much. I miss being able to meet you all in person too. I used to spend at least 3 months of the year traveling to see folks in person at events, typically Microsoft events, and there is nothing that can replace that connection. As a Microsoft person who's in charge of community, nothing replicates explaining what community means than going to an event and seeing someone up on stage sharing their best practices, seeing someone volunteer their time at a booth to explain to attendees how these products work and how to solve their problems. And there is a huge desire to go back to in person, but ultimately there's a lot of trepidation with that as well. People are not used to it. I'm certainly starting to feel like I need to be retrained to go out there into into the public sphere. We are also, you know, needing to rewire ourselves to be patient and kind to each other, because, you know, being in person requires a lot more, a different level of empathy, I would say. But, you know, if I ask people in the community, you know, do you want to go back to in person? It's always yes with an asterisk. People still are unsure about it, but there is a true desire to connect with people again. And that's really the element that we want to drive with user groups at Microsoft. So as I mentioned before, you know, there is this idea of going back to normal, but there is no we can't go back to the normal that we thought of pre-2020. We have an opportunity, though, to establish a new and more inclusive normal. When I heard that we were going to be working virtually, a part of me was very excited because I was really passionate about bridging the gap between our global community and those who attend events in person. And I thought, great, there's an opportunity for us to build a digital destination that allows people to connect both the in-person and the virtual attendee. So I still think that, especially with Microsoft Teams, we have the opportunity to build connections that allow everyone to feel included, no matter where they are in the world, what time zone. Technology can pave the path for better connection. I'm just checking to see if there's any other comments in the chat. The way I present, I've tried to be as organic and free-flowing and try and keep this interactive. Yeah, Michael, apologies if I bastardized your name. You're right, we tend to work more condensedly when we are switching from meeting to meeting. You're right. For in-person, I agree. Like, I'm excited about going back to in-person or even going back into the office, because potentially we may be able to slow down. We are building in time to go into the office kitchen and have a cup of tea with somebody, right? But we just don't have that time built because people are just led by their calendars as they are dictated by right now, and they're jumping from Teams meeting to Teams meeting. So you're right, I definitely empathize with that for sure, Mikhail. So user groups. Why user groups are important, I addressed that in a few slides previously, but for anyone, I just want to address on the call today, what are user groups for those who are uninitiated to it. So think of user groups as community-led groups that are built for people who use the products. That's why the term user is there. I don't love the term, but it's what the industry here uses. If anyone was interested in starting a group for people who use products like Microsoft Teams, like Power Automate, I highly encourage you to look at some of these tips. Don't start from scratch. Don't start from zero. There are so many user groups that are already out there who are looking for volunteers, who are looking for speakers. And this is a great way for you to get your feet wet in terms of what the value of user groups are. Also, just attend one and see what they're like. Not all user groups are excellent, I will say, but they're all trying to build community to try and connect you with other people who also use that product. So spend some time with the user group. You can go to aka.ms/UG. This is where you can find Power Platform and Dynamics 365 user groups, just speaking on behalf of my program. And I know there are plenty of others that are focused on Microsoft Teams if you're interested. So please take a look and see if you can attend some user groups there. But we also have other volunteer opportunities for folks to speak. We're certainly building out our own infrastructure around, putting down your name if you're interested in talking about Power Apps, Power Virtual Agents, what have you. We're definitely wanting to group people together so we have a volunteer army of speakers who are available to support your user groups. So if you are interested in learning more about user groups, aka.ms/UG is the place to go to learn more about Power Platform and Dynamics 365 user groups. So I want to address that first and foremost before I go way down the rabbit hole on all things user groups and people are still scratching their heads about what user groups are. So a few things that I'm going to go through in today's session are really about best practices around driving engaging user groups. I'm going to assume that everyone on this call knows what a user group is. If you don't, feel free to ask in chat. Brian is able to help answer your questions as we go along today. But I'm going to share with you some of the things that we've been learning as we are driving a lot of the work behind user group strategy for Dynamics 365 and Power Platform. Just to give you an idea as well, I'm trying to build a community of communities in a way. It's almost community inception. Since I joined this team, I've been trying to build a community around user group leaders. These are people who run user group meetings, organize community groups for users. And one of the things I've done is set up a regular meeting for user group leaders to engage with us, whether they are on our program or are just kicking the tires and wanting to know more about what this program has to offer. So these are some of the 3 main tips that I have in terms of trying to set a regular cadence for people to know about this community. And certainly it first comes with predictable cadence. We run our meetings on the 4th Tuesdays of every month. And we also make sure that we set up the meetings as Teams webinars. That way we can drive registration, we know how people are planning on attending, and the other thing that we do is we set vanity URLs behind each of the registration pages. So this way, should we change out the meeting and change out the time, we don't have to change our demand generation to go with that. So in the next couple of slides, I'll show you some screenshots of what I mean here. So specifically around setting up your meeting. If you want people to if you want to know who is actually going to turn up to your meeting, Teams meetings, you can certainly, run it that way and check the acceptances. But for any meeting that is external facing, which is typically what user groups are, you would most likely want to do it via a webinar registration. It doesn't matter which tenant they're on. They just simply register and they are able to access your webinar via the web app or in their client, whichever they prefer. So this is the what you would see if you were trying to start a new webinar. On the top, you might be able to see a link that says view registration form. That allows you to personalize the registration page for people to register for your particular event. And this is what it would look like when setting it up. You can upload a cover image, you can provide specific detail on your event title, when it's scheduled, and you can see specifically what time zone it's in. This is really important for us because we are reaching out to a global community, and being aware of the time zone that this is set, make sure that it is, you can communicate clearly exactly when your meeting is, so a global audience can prioritize their time around attending your event. There's some obvious things around, adding an abstract or a description and who your speakers are, but you can also customize your registration form. You can ask for typical things like name and email address, but also we like to add a field that says, hey, which user group do you belong to? Tell us if you belong to the Indianapolis Dynamics 365 user group, or whichever other one that you lead. This way you can get a sense of who is planning on attending your event before they even turn up. So that's really important. The other thing too is, this is what we typically do. I run my meetings, like I said, on every 4th Tuesday of the month, and I don't change these vanity links. We at Microsoft use aka.ms links, but some of you might be familiar with Bitly or other redirecting services. This is super helpful because every time I set a meeting, I don't want to have to change my demand generation tactics. I want to be able to say, hey, you could just click on this link. I just need to change out the destination URL so people go straight to the registration page that they need to go. So that's something that will certainly help you when it comes to thinking about the way that you generate demand for your regular cadenced meeting. So there's that. Yeah, and thank you, Brian, for sharing information about how to get started with Teams webinars. There's some really great articles on support.microsoft.com that give you some guidance on how to set them up. There's a lot of questions about whether people would, set up a Teams live event or Teams meetings or Teams webinars, and I've got some really great resources for you later on in today's session that will talk to that. So stay tuned. Now, when surveying user group leaders, many people have felt a little forlorn because they feel like, I've done all the work to get people to register, but people just aren't showing up. And so I don't feel like I'm sharing anything with you that is too revolutionary per se, but they are fundamental principles that really will help you ensure people will turn up to your meeting. Ultimately, like I said at the very top, time is precious. People are trying to determine which meeting, which commitment they should be actually going to versus just accepting blindly every meeting that comes up. So you have to make sure that your agenda is compelling for them. And so thinking about their shoes, why they would sitting in their shoes, why would they prioritize going to your meeting versus everything else that is conflicting at that same time slot. So setting an agenda, it's not, like I said, rocket science, but you will be surprised how many meetings I have in my calendar that are just blank. They don't have any agenda, they just set a title, you can see who's been invited, but there is no set agenda. So for me, I just don't feel as compelled to go to it because I don't know what I'm going to get out of that half an hour or 50 minutes. So being aware of, setting that out ahead of time, and even soliciting feedback on what people would like to hear in those meetings would be helpful. So for example, in my regular monthly user group leader connection meetings, I have an evaluation survey at the very end that says, hey, this is one, tell us what you want to hear in the next meeting. And that way there is a feedback mechanism that allows me to serve to my community what they want to hear. But I also, in that same meeting, say, I've already got an agenda plan for the next meeting. I'm going to have a guest speaker. His name is Rick McCutcheon from the Canadian community, and he's going to be sharing his best practices on how to build engaging user groups in Canada. Right. So I'm also setting the scene to say, we've got a plan, we've got an agenda. So be aware that our next meeting is happening on April 26th, and this is what we've got planned. But we will also integrate a lot of the feedback that you've sent in your evaluation forms to craft the agenda to your needs. So that way it really feels like a collaborative experience for your attendees to feel like they have a say in what you're going to present to them next time. And the other thing too is rewarding and recognizing people. I tend to, when I do meetings, this is, by the way, I don't typically do these sessions because it feels like I'm just talking all the time. I really like to hear other people speak and share their perspectives. And so a lot of the time when I do run these meetings, I spend some time rewarding and recognizing people for their contributions. For example, in the meeting I ran just yesterday for our user group leaders, I recognized two people, David Abu and Chris Allington, who are user group leaders for Power BI and showcasing all the great things that they do, but also gave David a chance to talk about what he's doing in Lagos, Nigeria, especially as he transitioned from being just a community member and an MVP to being an FT, and how he managed to keep his community going even as he was transitioning from in different roles. So, you know, spending the time, putting the focus onto your people and your attendees and thanking them for all that they do for you and for the community is really important. Yeah. So those are some quick tips. If you have any other best practices that you'd like to share with folks on the call today, feel free. I think this is a really great forum for all of us to share the things that we've learned to make building user groups super compelling for your attendees. And the next piece is around making the new normal engaging. Again, you know, I feel that some of these things, I feel particularly ingrained in the way I behave, but I have to recognize that this may not feel normal for everybody. So, you know, driving interaction, whether it be encouraging people to post questions in chat, and also having your own strategy to pay attention to the interaction that's happening. You might say that you want this to be interactive, but if you don't have another eyeball looking at the chat window, then it's not really interactive. So sometimes asking for help, as Brian has been helping me today, to moderate conversations so people don't feel like they're not being listened to, is really important. So don't be afraid to ask for help. And that's why you need not necessarily a volunteer army, but just maybe one or two people who can spend the time to help you with your session is really important to make it an engaging experience for everyone who is on your call. And then ultimately making the meeting about them. Again, I really don't like talking about myself or the things that I do, but I certainly want to make sure that this content is palatable, not just palatable for you, but is something that you can take away and apply tomorrow if you are leading user groups, right? So I really want to focus on making this content about you, which is why I've you know, driven you to engage with us in chat and share your best practices. That way it's engaging for everyone. It's just not just me talking. And also being camera ready. This is something that I have also had to deal with, and that wasn't really natural for me. I've certainly noticed that when other people turn their camera on for the meeting, and if I do as well, that I am much more engaged. If I don't turn my camera on and someone else does, I am also 50% less engaged. And if nobody turns their camera on, it tells me that it is almost okay for me to multitask while that meeting is on. So it is a forcing function to really drive true engagement so that I can build authentic, trusted relationships through these virtual mechanisms. And the same applies to community events, user groups, etc. You have to lead by example, and if you can do that, you are also setting the standard for what's acceptable as meeting protocol for your user groups. I'm just checking on the chat to see if there's any particular questions. There's some really good conversation here. Finding that adding the registration drastically drops the attendance rate. Interesting. Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I think from a user group leader point of view, for me, I would certainly want to know who is registering so that I can tell, you know, my stakeholders and anyone who is interested in talking to this audience how many people and who typically turns up. But you're right. If your registration process is super has a lot of friction, then people are going to be like, you know what, it's too hard. They're asking for me to jump through too many hoops in order to turn up to their meeting. So there is certainly this term that we use internally where it's 5 seconds to log in and 5 minutes to wow. I attribute that quote to James Phillips, who was our CVP in the business applications world. But it's true, because we really want to ensure that if we're making things difficult for them to even jump through open the first door, then we're going to have a really terrible time of getting them to even turn up. So that's a fair point, I think. But, you know, I think in a world of completely no registration also makes it difficult to showcase the value of your meeting. So it is a bit of a double-edged sword, you're right. Yeah, but thank you, Matt. I really appreciate that. Mine says her user groups meets on Saturdays, not to interfere with billable hours or family time. That's great if you can commit to that. For some people, Saturday is their family time as well. But yeah, I mean, that's why SharePoint Saturdays are a thing, amongst other Saturday initiatives. So we certainly see a lot of community members driving things through Saturday. Yeah, friction of Office 365 online sign-on. Yep, I've heard that, Matt. You are 100% correct on that one. So hopefully we can navigate that for you to come up with a good solution. Yeah, cool. Thank you for sharing that on chat. Yeah, it is tricky to find suitable times. So I want to move on and talk about something that is a bit of an elephant in the room, which is hybrid events. I asked on Twitter, if you want to follow me on Twitter, my handle is @_ACHU, ACHU. I asked a question, how are you all dealing with hybrid events? And to define hybrid, this is an event that has both in-person attendees and virtual attendees. So people who are in a room physically, and there is also potentially a Teams meeting to bridge virtual attendees of that same event. So a few people who are leading events have shared a few of these quotes with you. I'm not going to read all the signs, but I'll boil it down to a number of different things. Some user group leaders and community leaders have said, like, it's a true hybrid event connects both that remote audience as well as in person together, but not just with each other, also with the speakers, and there's video and audio connecting them all together. However, that is a huge undertaking when it comes to resources. It would mean you would need to have someone who is focused on the in-person delivery. You need to have someone who is focusing on the virtual audience, and someone who is bridging the two to make sure that the speaker is engaging both audiences at the same time. We have seen people who are delivering sessions in person tend to prioritize those who are in person in front of them, because the distance is much more immediate and you can see the person's reaction, etc. But remote requires you to have to look at another panel to pay attention to that. And if you know that someone else is taking care of it, you may even ignore that audience. So that can be challenging. And having the technology to support that. Do you have the right hardware, speakers, microphones, etc., in order to build that engagement? So yeah, it certainly is challenging, and it highly is dependent on how large your virtual audience is. Do you have 100 people logging in while you have 20 people in the room? That can be certainly difficult to moderate and control when you think of the volume of conversation and chatter happening, and it's hard for the person, if you have a person moderating that virtual audience, to relay all of that to your in-person speaker potentially. And there's a few things that people talked about specifically around questions and answers, Q&A. This was a really great suggestion, and not everyone can do this, but if you were able to host a specific virtual room that the speaker could engage with your virtual attendees after the session is over, that certainly can help, but it means that you will need to build that out in your timeline. Just making sure that maybe it's even a half an hour buffer after your session is done, so that you can support the questions is something that people have done and done well, but certainly that takes time as well. And this goes back to Matt's question, well, Matt's comment around zero friction. Some people just want to log on anonymously and just consume the content, so and just get in and get out, right? Making joining super simple, no login, no zero BS, etc. That's exactly what Matt was saying earlier. So yeah, your feedback has definitely been heard and shared by many others. But also, this is to my first point, it takes a lot of resources to run a hybrid site, especially when you're already just running community on your own. You may be very under-resourced to deliver a very engaging hybrid experience. So these are just some quotes to sort of get a sense of what's top of mind for people when it comes to hybrid events. And hopefully, some of this resonates with you as you've been navigating that hybrid world. So a couple of things. I've been presenting for the last 10 or so years, and I've been managing my own notes on what I can do to be a better presenter. And it's funny, and every time I present on a session like this or anywhere else, I always refer to that list that I started writing 10 years ago. And what's funny is that some of these things do not change. I have a list, and I literally have it on my other screen over here. It's funny because I have a list that is about in-person delivery as well as webinar presentation skills. And a lot of these things still resonate and are true despite pandemic, despite everything else. Engaging both audiences is really important. Even though I mentioned how resource intensive it can be, it really makes a huge difference and makes the audience feel really appreciated if you made the effort to try and engage them both virtually and whether they are in person as well. We certainly empathize with anyone who has decided to take time out of their personal schedule to go and travel in person to go to an event. So they certainly should feel like they are prioritized, but it shouldn't feel like it is at the expense of those who just are unable to go to these events in person, and also may not be able to afford the price of admission to go there in person as well. So that is something to keep in mind. Slides are kind of important. I say that not really jokingly, but kind of jokingly, just because when your delivery is in person, actually you are more important than the slides. But in a hybrid world, the slides are primarily the thing that your attendees are engaging with. So even me, as I've been crafting this PowerPoint slide today, I deliberately made things super simple. My last slide was not, I apologize, that was terrible eye chart, and that was an example of a really terrible slide. But here I've been trying to keep things super simple to a number of key points to make it easier for you to gravitate towards the content I'm delivering, as well as giving you some stimuli to generate conversation in the chat. I really want to convey specific things that tell you these are the key takeaways. People, and we also live in a social world, and by social I mean social media. People will take screenshots, they will post things, and you want your message to still resonate outside of context of the session. So feel free to screenshot my slides is basically what I'm also saying. But two, don't spend too much time trying to overload your slideware with a ton of information, because it will go over people's heads. And this remains the same for hybrid for sure. And then I think I've belabored the point around the virtual connection and in-person attendee connection, but it's also about that speaker. You are the center of attention when it comes to delivering your session, and you need to try and find ways to make sure that your virtual attendees are connecting with you, your in-person attendees are connecting with you, but also they feel like they are united as one attendee community. So a few things that you could do, firstly, through surveys, if you want to do polling, something I've seen done really well. I forget what technology it is, but some of you may be familiar with this, where someone shows up a QR code that allows people to submit responses to questions, and you can see the results in real time. And whether you are a virtual attendee or an in-person attendee, you're all interacting and applying that groupthink together. So that's one particular way that you can drive that connection between the attendees, no matter where they are engaging with your content. If there are other ideas, feel free to share in chat. I'd love to learn more. I see these sessions as a way for me to learn about best practices, as well as for you to share information with each other. Let me just see if there's anything else. Yeah, Brian, key of found in user groups I've been involved in to discuss the meeting and daytime occasionally. Different audiences have different preferences. Yeah, it's tough. It's when you're trying to please everyone, you may not please anybody. That can be challenging. We do our best to try and make sure that we have meetings that are in 2 time zones, both the Western Europe folks and our friends in APAC. But not everyone can do that depending on where they are presenting in the world. I have a colleague who's based in Portugal, and for him, the APAC time zone is not very helpful for him to achieve work-life balance. So, you know, certainly there are different ways to think about what time makes best sense. And I think that, Brian, your comment was more about the Saturday piece. So I think that's what you were alluding to. Yeah, Matt Bennett says his audience is always with the remote field sales team. So yes, keeping things simple is absolutely key. You're 100% right on the money there. So really, you know, the old is kind of new again. We're still learning every day about different ways that we can be better community leaders through the technology that we have. We are certainly powered by Microsoft Teams in the way that we run our user groups. And specifically, we have a specific offer to support our user groups on our experience. Everyone who is a user group leader gets access to 5 E5 licenses that give them access to Microsoft Teams, as well as the rest of the Microsoft 365 stack, to help them, 1, run their virtual meetings, 2, get organized and have a destination to drive people to after the user group meeting is over, whether it is to watch the recording, download the PowerPoint deck, and even to engage in chat to facilitate the discussion, because the meeting is great, but it's only just the impetus for people to gather community together. So I wanted to share a few things about why this really motivates us. People just want, and these are all quotes from user group leaders on our experience. Mike Carlo, some of you may know him. For him, user groups are just important for him so that he can hang out with people, and it allows him to give back, to build into them the way people have built into me. I really love this quote. It really motivates me and tells me that we're doing the right thing when we're putting our efforts behind user groups. For me, I really love this quote from Andrew Bibey. For him, one of the biggest benefits is that you get to connect with people and talk about everyday stuff and problems we face. It's a reminder that we aren't alone and that we've got this. He's made so many friends along the way, and maintaining this connection through COVID has been really important. So for us, I applaud anyone who has, you know, continue to drive community despite all the challenges that the last 2.5 years have placed in front of us. And if there's any help that you need, feel free to reach out to me. You can find me on Twitter @_HU. You can follow me, and I'm happy to accept any DMs to help you with your journey around community and user groups. And this is the slide that where I tell you what I do for user groups, specifically for Microsoft Dynamics 365 and Power Platform. We have user groups. I think we have a little just shy of 500 user groups now who have joined our program. And by joining this program, you not only get those 5 E5 licenses that I mentioned earlier, but you get access to a number of different benefits that we're working behind the scenes on. One is Project Connect. Project Connect is an initiative that allows you as a user group leader to get in touch with local Microsoft staff, whether they be in local Microsoft offices, to help you with hiring the venue space within the local real estate there at Microsoft offices, as well as being your local connection to local partners, local customers, etc. So Project Connect is a part of this Dynamics 365 and Power Platform user group experience. We've also done a lot of work to support underserved communities. We have 100% discounted exam vouchers for anyone who is has been displaced by recent challenges, whether it's because of the pandemic or they simply cannot afford the price to get themselves certified. Whether they are students or changing careers, these are who these discounted exam vouchers are for. So those are just some of the benefits that you can get from joining our user group experience. And I certainly encourage you to take a look at aka.ms/UG to learn more. And if you want to join us, feel free. We'd be very excited to have you. And this is what I was alluding to earlier when discussing this session with Brian. He said, hey, like, you should take a look at this virtual events playbook. If any of you are leading virtual meetings, this goes back to my point earlier around Teams meetings versus Teams webinars versus Teams live events. A lot of this information is here in this virtual events playbook. You can download it at aka.ms/fullvep. It is probably 70+ pages deep, maybe more. And it goes through in depth all the information you need to make sure that you run an effective meeting, from what IT needs to know, presenter and moderator guidance, you know, common pitfalls to avoid. It's all there, and it's on the adoption.microsoft.com site. So please take a look if that's something that you're interested in. So yeah, that's basically all I had time for today. Thank you so much for engaging with me on this Teams Nation session, and thank you so much to the organisers for inviting me and to allowing me to spend some time with our Teams Nation attendees. I'm going to ask you to please scan this QR code to share your feedback. I certainly would love to learn what I could do to make this session better, because I would like to share this session with other events as well. So anything that you can do to help me improve this session would be great. Thank you to Brian for helping me moderate the questions. I will certainly pay attention to it as well. But that's all I had today. Thank you so much for your time.